Hello everyone, make that 1 o'clock. So we'll begin the webinar. And just before I begin, just going to ask if everyone could let me know that they can hear me and the sound is coming through all right. If you could just write in the chat box that you can hear me, just so I'm not talking to myself and you're wondering what's going on. Someone could just let me know that the sound is coming through all right. Okay, just got some questions. Someone's posted into the question box that the chat appears to be disabled, but that people are messaging and saying that the sound is actually coming through all right. So that's fine. Either way, if you want to post in the chat box or post in the question box, that's fine. At the end of today, at the end of the session, we will have a question and answer session. So that's all fine. Please do write your questions where you want. And I'll begin the class then. So just to quickly introduce myself before I begin, my name is Peter Steth, and I am one of the senior managers at Astranti Financial Training. Now, my background is in sales and finance, but I've been working in tuition for several years now and have been the head of the CIMA course at Astranti Financial Training and the lead tutor on the strategic case study, which is the final exam that you'll need to pass your CIMA exams. And over the years, we've really worked out ways in which we can help students at all levels to pass their exams, particularly in the case study and also with our approach towards the objective tests. And throughout this presentation, what I'm going to do is talk through the best ways to approach your revision, the way in which the exam is broken down, the kind of knowledge you will need to know, and also some exam techniques as well, how to approach the exam, and also what kinds of little things to look out for, because there will be quite a lot of subtle, different ways of approaching questions, and there'll be certain words you really need to focus on and to pick out to really pinpoint what the question is asking you, because the question will not always be as obvious as it first appears. And also, I'm going to go through some reasons why students often don't get on with their studies, if we have time as well, which is based on a different presentation I actually did for CIMA UK. But if we do have time, I want to run through a few key points of that as well, because that will add additional motivation for you all to get started on your certificate exams. So let's start by looking at what the BA certificate is. So the BA certificate was introduced a couple of years ago, and it serves as a really handy introduction to the CIMA syllabus. A lot of the content that you learn in the CIMA certificate, you'll actually build upon over the operational and the management level, and even at the strategic level. So it's really worthwhile really learning the content that you need to learn for the BA certificate, not just to pass the exam, but to retain this well, because it will be really useful as you move on to the next levels in your CIMA journey. And there are four main subjects: the BA1, which is business economics; fundamentals of accounting, management accounting, which is BA2, and that particularly will be referenced throughout the rest of your studies. So the fundamentals of management accounting is the BA2, then you move on to management accounting for P1, and then advanced management accounting for P2. And a lot of the same content is actually reused on those different levels. It's just used in a slightly different way. The actual level of knowledge that is required is increased, and also how to specifically use the information. So BA2, you are perhaps learning and understanding it and regurgitating information in your exam. In the P1, you are applying it, and in P2 you are analyzing it. The benefits, the advantages, the disadvantages of using it, which methods might be most appropriate for different companies for different reasons, etc. And then BA3 is your financial accounting. This is more what people think of when they think of accountants, more traditional accountants. So looking at how to create statements of financial position and looking at the various different financial regulations. And again, you'll need to refer to that in F1 and F2, F3, etc. And then we also have BA4, which is mostly a subject that underpins a lot of everything else, hence why it's on the bottom of this diagram. And that's also the fundamentals of general business ethics and corporate governance. And again, those will be prevalent throughout your CIMA studies. If there were two topics that appear more than anything else across all the subjects, all the different levels of CIMA, it is ethics and corporate governance. Case in point, I did a day-long online classroom for my strategic case study students last weekend, and we spoke about governance and we spoke about ethics at certain points. And this is for the strategic case study. So you need to learn it now. And a lot of this might actually be familiar with some of you, particularly if you study business at university. If you have a BSc, etc. in business, you probably will have learned some of these before. And that also puts you in a better position. You should already know some of the stuff. And the certificate level is lower than at the degree level, because it's a transitional course to bring people who perhaps haven't got an accounting background in terms of what they did at university up to speed before we begin the actual CIMA, the operational management strategic levels. So those are the 4 you will need to learn, and they can be taken in any order. Just because the diagram here says that BA4 is at the bottom doesn't actually mean you have to do BA4 and then you have to move on to the others. You can take them in any order. In fact, you could take them at once if you wanted to. I wouldn't necessarily advise that. I'd advise that you study and fully focus on each one at a time. But if you did want to perhaps give yourself a longer period of time and book all 4 exams at once and do a bit of BA1, a bit of BA2, you could do that as well. There are no actual requirements imposed on you by CIMA for when you do the particular qualifications. So you probably are wondering what's the best way to approach these exams? How do I study for these exams? When I was at university, we did a lot of assignments and coursework, and that was a bit different. These are online computer-based multiple choice tests. I've not done questions like this, exams like this before. How do we go about doing that? And I understand that, and this is one of the problems. A lot of students, they really procrastinate about getting on with their study and getting on starting. And so what we're going to do now is talk about how to best prepare for each particular module. And hopefully that should serve as some sort of motivating factor as well for all of you to get on with your studies. So the steps that we teach here, the process, so to speak, 3 steps: learn it, solidify it, assess it. And this is what I mean by assess is not actually you're taking your exam, but you assess yourself as well. Self-assessment, see where you are struggling, where you need to improve on. And that's also very important, because the more you assess yourself, the more bought in you'll be. When someone gives you feedback and says you need to work on this, you might, yeah, okay, I'll try and work on that. But when you yourself pick out a weakness that you're having, you naturally more inclined to be determined to correct that particular issue. So first of all, we start with learn. You need to cover the entire syllabus and understand exactly how you will be tested and what you will be tested on. It's not a case of just reading through lots of models and things like that you think are related to economics and being in a position to suddenly be able to pass your economics paper. You need to learn the very specific things that are required in the BA1 syllabus for that. Because there's no point in finding a general textbook on economics and just reading that, because that might contain loads of information that's not needed for your BA1 exam. So the best thing to do is find a textbook. You have textbooks at Astranti, there's the Kaplan books, etc., one that is specifically focused on the BA1 syllabus. So you know exactly what you need to revise, exactly what you need to learn. And solidify that knowledge by practicing memory recollection. So even something as simple as something that seems to have gone out the way by the wayside as things have moved on to computers, etc. Back when I was at school, they often used to say, read a piece of paper, read a page, put a blank piece of paper over it and see how much you can remember of it, just to make sure that you can recall that information and use it effectively. Also, get some nice simple practice questions to test your knowledge and understanding. Again, we have questions here, or the Kaplan books also have the questions in the back, just to test whether you have understood it, whether you really get it. Because that's also something that students often miss out. They read something, think they've got it, move on. They don't test whether they've got it. And at best, they may not have got it in that situation, or worse, they might feel that they definitely have it. And they don't need to look at that anymore. I've looked at that already. I won't need to go back to it again. But actually, they didn't test whether they had understood it, and they didn't actually understand it. But now they think they've got it and they've moved on. They're not going to come back to it. So now if a question that comes up, they're not going to get it. And then assess, give yourself an actual mock exam, create a mock exam or use a mock exam, test yourself under exam conditions. And that's another thing that I can't stress enough, is exam conditions is imperative. So many students, they test themselves not under exam conditions. And that's pointless. You may as well not test yourself if you're not going to test yourself under exam conditions, because if you can't work like that, if you can't operate like that on the day of the actual exam, then you're not preparing yourself for it. Because one of the problems with the CIMA exam, or one of the difficulties with the CIMA exam, it's not that people don't know the content, because they spend weeks learning the content. It's the time pressure. There's so much to do in such little space of time. And therefore, you have to prepare for that exam pressure. You have to prepare for that time management as well. And that's why it's very, very important to test yourself under exam conditions. And also clear your desk, whatever you are testing yourself, or wherever you're testing yourself, from distractions as well. So things like phones, things like textbooks that you may be tempted to look at. You may be tempted to just find that particular formula from the textbook. Oh, it's just this one, I'll do it. Are you going to have that on the day? You going to have that textbook open on the day? No. So don't do it when you are testing it yourself. And there are quite a few different methods that you can use to revise. And we've had thousands of students over the years here at Astranti, and some of them prefer different methods. And it's important that you find the revision method that works well for you. It's not a one-size-fits-all. And if you are using a revision method that is just not handy for you, it's just not helpful for you, then you're best off looking for another. Don't just stick with it, even though it's clear it's not working. You need to find another method, because if you spend all afternoon revising and nothing goes in, you don't learn anything, then you've wasted your time. So it's better to spend an hour and everything go in than it is to spend 6 hours and nothing go in. So think about how you learn, how you have best learned in the past, and find a provider or find someone that provides the method that is good for you. So it could be that you choose a classroom-based provider. Again, that might be quite difficult at the time with the lockdowns, etc. But if you learn best in a classroom, then find a provider that provides classroom-based courses or an online classroom. If you learn better from study text, from reading, then find the books, find the revision notes, find all the things that are written down on paper. If you are an audiovisual learner, then find a provider that provides tuition videos, that talks through the topics on screen through a presentation, similar to what I'm doing now, but with a specific topic. And if you are a kinetic learner, if you learn by doing, then find as many practice questions and mock exams as you can. I've had students before that they learn through the questions. They get questions and they just take them over and over again, even though if they haven't even learned the stuff yet, they haven't revised it yet, but they learn through understanding where they went wrong. They learn by understanding they got this question wrong because actually the theory is X, Y, Z. That's how some students do actually learn. So find a provider or find a method that suits you and use that method. And it's imperative that you cover the entire syllabus because it will be tested on the entire syllabus. It's not like perhaps when you were at university and you had a written paper and you might have had 14 major topics to learn, and there were going to be 10 questions in the exam and you had to answer 4 of them, and they were written answers. So you thought, oh, well, I'm just not going to answer a question on topics 4 and 5 because I don't like them, so I won't even bother revising them. It's not a case that you can do that here. The questions will be from the entire syllabus. You may have noticed that the syllabus structure is broken down by parts A, B, C, and D. Some there's more, some there's less, and there is a 25%, 30%, 15%, etc. for these different things. Now, all the topics that come under one of those headings, so part A or part B, etc., that percentage weighting is how many questions there's going to be in the exam. So, for example, there are 60 questions for the BA certificate. So that means that there will be 15 questions from macroeconomic and institutional context of business. So all the topics that come under that particular heading, 15 questions in the exam will be from there. So it does mean that you will have to learn everything. You can't just say, well, I don't really like macroeconomics, but I'm going to focus on microeconomics, information context, and financial context, and just hope that I get enough from that to pass. Because otherwise, you're ruling yourself out 25% of the marks altogether. And also think of that as a percentage weighting, how much time you should spend. So if you've got 4 weeks to revise, then you should be spending a week on macroeconomic and institutional context of business. If something's worth 50%, then don't spend a day before the exam looking at it while you spent a month looking at the thing that was only worth 10%, because you're only ever going to get 6 questions from that, and you can't pass the exam by having 6%. And then take a look at the actual breakdown of the syllabus as well. Look at the component and the indicative syllabus content. The indicative content is the specific topics that are going to be covered, and the component is the approach that's going to be taken in the exam. So, for example, explain determination of macroeconomic phenomena, including equilibrium, etc., etc., etc. Explain the stages of the trade cycle. So what it's saying there, it's not saying analyze the advantages and disadvantages of the trade cycle, but it's saying explain the stages, so the consequences at each stage for policy choices of government. It doesn't say just understand them from a really theoretical perspective. It's giving you a very specific focal point of how you should be analyzing the trade cycle. Then once you've done all your revision, you've understood the syllabus, etc., then get your practice questions. Get as many as possible to test your knowledge. Make sure you do it under time conditions. Also review the solutions as well. So make sure that you understand why you got a question right and why you got a question wrong. Now, often students will look at why they got a question wrong, but they won't look at why they were right. And it might be that while you were right, you might just think, oh, I got that question right, that's fine, move on. But it could be the actual explanation of why you were right is not the same reason why you chose that as the right answer. And so it could be that you actually had the wrong interpretation, but just by pure luck, you managed to get the question right anyway. So really read the solutions regardless of whether you're right or wrong to understand what happened. And to just give you an example of this, this is a copy of some of our questions, and other providers have got similar questions as well, that the solutions will contain both the reasons why the right answer was right and why the wrong answers were wrong, and also some background information on the theory as well, just so you understand the context of how the question was asked. So do take a look at those. Just as on the side note, if you do sign up at the Astranti website, we do actually have all our certificate material on there for free. So if you sign up with the Astranti website, you can access all of these questions for free, along with our study text as well for the certificate level. So that's www.astranti.com. So that's the approach to the revision. So we've established now, we're sitting our certificate exam, and we're looking at how to revise and We're looking at the various different ways in which we can improve our knowledge, etc. But now let's fast forward to the exam day. So we're sitting down in an exam hall or at home, as some of them are now, on the computer because of the COVID-19, and we're taking our actual exam. What kinds of things are going to happen in the exam? What kinds of things do we need to be aware of in the exam? Well, start by explaining how it all works. So there are 60 questions at BA1, BA2, or BA3, and there are 85 questions for BA4. And that's not to say that the BA4 is actually a lot harder, because the questions are usually shorter. There are less calculations, etc., because it's ethics and codes of governance, etc. And you have 120 minutes to pass the exam. And so particularly for BA1, 2, 3, that's 2 minutes per question. Now, this is actually more time, even though that sounds quite tight, this is actually more time than you are given at the later levels. So at operational management and strategic level, again, you have 60 questions, but you actually have 90 minutes. So for those levels, you have longer, harder questions, yet you actually have less time to answer it. So it's good practice now to really get in the rhythm of these objective test exams, because you'll have to build on that as you progress through CIMA. And it will be marked on a scaled score of roughly 100 out of 150, although for some of the certificate exams, this can be lower. The scaled score does fluctuate. It's not a case of it's always X%. It's basically based on the performance of all candidates. So if there's a question that all candidates are expected to get right, it's a very, very simple question, a fill in the blank over a term that everyone knows. 99% of students are expected to get that right. That will be worth less because everyone's getting that question right. Whereas if you've got a very difficult question that only 10% of students are expected to get correct, then getting that question correct will be worth more marks on the scaled score, because you are separating and distinguishing yourself from the other candidates taking that exam. And there are quite a few different forms of question that you might get, and there is a different approach for each of them. The most common is a multiple choice. I'm sure you're all aware of what a multiple choice question is. You get a question and there are 4 or 5 potential options and you have to select the right one. And the approach for these is to usually rule out a couple straight away. Often you'll be able to rule out a couple off the bat, and then you'll have to really look at the remaining ones to see exactly what the question is asking for. Because sometimes they will not be super obvious. You won't be asked to give, what are the advantages of this particular model or something like that, and there'll be 1 advantage and 3 disadvantages. And all we have to do is look, well, these 3 are clearly, even says in the option that it's a negative thing, so those clearly aren't advantages, so it must be the one thing that it says is an advantage. It won't be like that. It will dress up disadvantages as advantages, or it will say something that appears to be a really strong advantage, but actually it relates to a different model and not the specific model that's being tested on, etc. So you really have to read into the question as well to really pick out the key bits of information. You might also get multiple response questions. And again, as the name would suggest, this is where you will have several potential options and you will need to select a given amount. And this can come in 2 forms. It can come in the form of where it's been asked which 3, as this question is, or which 2, which 4, etc. Or it could ask a question, say, which of the following are elements in the PESTEL analytical framework? Select all that apply. So it's not telling you how many you have to select. It's saying you must select all that apply. And that obviously adds a bit of an increase to the difficulty factor, particularly if you think there are 3 options and then there's one that could be or might not be. But if it said which 3, you would have said, okay, we won't include it. If it said which 4, you would definitely have included it. But when it says select all, that can be a bit harder. So again, with these similar approach to the multiple choice, is that you might be given some that are definitely correct, some that are definitely incorrect, and some that are in the middle, that are on the fence, and you have to think about a bit more. Another type could be the drag and drop. So this is where you might be given a table, or you might be given a sentence with some blanks in, and you're given a list of options, and you have to drag them into the relevant place. So for example, this one here, it's about short-term finance and long-term finance. You have to look through those different examples, analyze those types of finance, and then select where they would appear in the chart. So for example, you would put overdraft in short-term finance because that's a very short-term finance. You would put mortgage in long-term finance because that's very long-term finance, etc. Or hotspot. Hotspot is where you click on something, hence the name hotspot. So that's the hotspot, the correct bit. And often this will be in the form of a graph or a table or a model, etc. And you are expected to click on the location. So you might have to click on a certain point, on a certain line, in a certain box, if it's a matrix, etc., to basically say this is the correct answer here. This is the bit where the company will break even. This is the part of the matrix that talks about X, Y, Z. Data input, this will be in the form of numerics, or it will be in the form of a word if you have to write in a specific word for a missing word, etc. So, but often it generally will be a calculation question, very similar to the one that's on screen now. So we can get the various different figures. You have to analyze the figures that you need to calculate, and then you write the correct answer in the box. And the question will also give you some information over how many decimal places to use and whether you have to include the whether it's pounds or dollars, etc. Just on a note on rounding, because students do often ask about this, the actual result, so what the computer is going to say is the right answer or not the right answer for this section, will have a range built in to account for different levels of rounding, because CIMA is not a maths test, CIMA is an accounting test. Just because you rounded something differently doesn't mean that you didn't know the actual method for calculating something. But generally what I would suggest is that you do not round until the final answer. So you use the number of decimal places the calculator gives you, etc., until you get to the end, then you round to 1 decimal place. Because sometimes students, they round up during the actual calculation, and you can actually be quite different. By the time you've gone through several calculations, if you've rounded up by quite a substantial amount at each level, you can have a really different answer by the time you get to the end result. And one thing to really make use of in the Pearson VUE system, which is what this is based on, is the flag for review. And as I mentioned earlier, so just quickly go back, you've got 120 minutes to answer 60 questions. So you've only got 2 minutes per question. Now, there will be certain questions that you come on to, say, for example, this, and you think, oh, I know that, and you answer it very quickly within 10 seconds. You may get to another question, as for example, we were struggling with this question, and be looking at it and thinking, well, I have no idea how to answer this. And students will take the time, and they'll think about it, and they'll, before you know it, you've spent 3, 4, 5 minutes just over this question. You have no idea how to answer it. And that's just a complete waste of your time. You're not going to pass this if you are just approaching each question, taking as long as each question takes to answer, because you eventually get to one you're stuck on, spend 10 minutes over it, you've missed a huge portion of your time, and the 120 minutes will be up, and you'll still be 10 questions from the end. So what I would suggest you do is to flag the questions for review, the ones that you can't get straight away, and come back to them later. You want to get all those marks you know you definitely can get from the questions you definitely can answer first, before returning and going through the ones that you struggled with initially. And you could easily do this simply by clicking the flag for review button in the top corner. And if you ever want to access those questions and jump to those questions, click the navigator button at the bottom of the screen. And that will come up with a list of all the different questions and the current status. So the ones that you have answered already will say complete. The ones that you have flagged will come up with this flag icon. And you can just click on the question 2, click on the question 3, etc., and it will jump you straight back to those questions. You also have a calculator and a scratch pad, and the purpose of these is basically it's to keep everything on the computer. So you have got all the information you need. You have the calculator there, so you don't have to take a calculator into the exam. You have the scratch pad, which means you don't need a pen or paper. Everything can be contained on the computer for security means. And the scratch pad is not marked in any way, shape, or form. It's disposed of the second that the actual exam finishes. It's not passed on to the markers and doesn't go through any kind of assessment process. It's just there for you to write notes on. So if you are, let's think back to this question here, you're doing a calculation question, you can open up the scratch pad, have it on the side of the screen, write all your different calculations out there, use the calculator while you still got a view of the question, so you can make sure that you are answering correctly using the right figures, so you're not having to jump back and forth between the two. And essentially you just use that as notes. That's what it is. It's an online scrap of paper. So on to my approach. So this is the approach that we teach at Astranti for how to approach the objective test exams. And it's a 3-step approach. And the first step is to answer all the questions, the very short questions that you can answer very quickly and very confidently. So you're just going through your 60 questions, and any question that you can answer in 10, 15 seconds, all you need to do is read it and say, no, that's the right answer. Not saying you're going to get a question this simple, but as an example, what does the P stand for in pastel? You know what pastel stands for. P is for political. Find the option that's political. Click, move on. So just go through that, get all those really, really easy questions that you can answer very quickly and efficiently right, and flag everything else. If you look at it and you almost don't get it straight away, you can't get it within 30 seconds, just flag it and move on. Because you're going to have plenty of time to come back to those later. You're 120 minutes, you're only spending 10, 15 minutes quickly going through, getting all the ones you know you can get right. You might find there's 10, 15 questions out of the 60 you can just get in 30 seconds. And so isn't it really good to get those marks in the bank, because you now got those marks? You don't have to worry about, will I have missed a question that I definitely could have answered? Because what you don't want to be is in a situation where you've got 2 minutes left and you're on question 50. And so now you've got to go through the last 10 questions and just clicking a random answer for each. Because probably there would have been a couple in there you definitely could have gotten right if you just had 30 seconds to look at them. So you get those quick wins, you get those answers in the bank now before you go back and take a look at the questions that you struggled with. So you're not losing out on the marks that you definitely could have got by spending too long on questions that you weren't sure of. So then you go through the second time round using that navigator, using those flagged functions to look at all the ones that you weren't sure about the first time around. So the longer questions, but the ones that once you've read through them and you've thought about them, you can answer. So this time spend around 1.5 minutes on each question. And if you still can't get it after that, again, don't spend more time, don't spend another 5 minutes on it. Flag it and move on. Keep it flagged and move on. The other ones that you do answer will automatically be removed from the flag. And then once you've gone through the second time, that'll be the bulk of your time. In the last round, which perhaps you might have 10 to 15 minutes left, it's time to go back and look at all the ones you just couldn't answer for whatever reason. And again, have another think about them, but if you can't think of anything, just put an answer. There's no negative marking in the CIMA certificate exam. So it doesn't matter if you get the answer wrong. You won't lose a mark for it. In fact, you might gain a mark because you might, but per chance, have selected the right one. If it's a multiple choice with 4 options, you've got a 25% chance of getting it right just by clicking one. Of course, that doesn't really work for a type-in one, but if it's multiple choice, you're actually in a good position. If you've got 10 questions that you can't answer and you just put A for each of them, chances are you might get 2-3 marks out of that 10, even though you didn't know the answer to any of them. So always go back again and make sure you write an answer for everything. You put an answer for everything. Also, read the whole question and make note of certain words, because sometimes students will skim read it and they'll see a word that they recognize, a model that they recognize, and their mind will then fill in the blanks in terms of what the question is asking of them, or will inherently create a bias towards what they want the question to be or what they think the question is going to be. And you don't want to do that, because sometimes it might be completely different. So always make sure that you're looking for certain words as well, which will affect the outcome of the question. So, for example, words like not, always, never, most, least, best, worst. These can be quite important, because if you are looking at a multiple choice question and it says, which of these would be the best way of solving this problem? And what it could be is they are all ways of solving the problem, or 2 of them might not be ways of solving the problem, 2 might be, one slightly better than the other. Now, if you're just assuming that is a multiple choice, you're just reading through saying, okay, they're asking me to figure out how to solve this problem. As you're going through them, you might think, A would definitely solve it, so that's the right answer. But C might have been another way that was slightly better, and they're asking you for the best way to solve the problem. So just give some examples of these things. So which of these issues would not be the outcome of unemployment? So it's not saying which of these problems may occur as a result of rising unemployment, etc. It's asking you for the opposite. Now, CIMA have said they don't tend to use this too much, the kind of double negative aspect of it, but just be aware that you might be asked which are not, which actually flips the question on its head in terms of what it's actually asking for. All, again, for select all that apply. It's not just saying that select 3 or 4, etc. It could be anything that technically applies. Check for the number, obviously, if it's a multiple response with a given number of options. Most, as I mentioned earlier, that's a bit like best. Which candidate is most suited for this position? Now, you might be looking at that and thinking that, well, they've all got reasons why they would be a director. And you might just think, oh, Tim, he's got 25 years experience, so that's really good. No, he's the most suited for it. But you need to look at the background of the question as well. What kind of company is it that makes, just because one director's got 20 years of experience and one's got 10 years of experience, but one has been working in the same industry, that might make them more suitable. And the same for best, as I always already said. And that often can be as well to do with statements. They say which statement best describes the difference or the relationship between 2 things. And they might all, in some way, shape, or form, describe it. And they're all correct. All of the statements describe the difference, or they describe the definition, etc. But one of them will just be slightly better than the others, or they might look identical, but one just has a bit of a difference that makes it incorrect or makes it not quite as good a description. So when you are approaching all these questions in your exam, the best thing to do is think about your response and then read the answer choices. So what I mean by that is don't try to look at the responses and use that in your thought process, unless it's asking you something like which of that bit like this, where you have to actually look at it. Although even then you could think, you say like, so what ultimately is the difference between incrementalism and logical incrementalism? And then look at the answers, because it stops you being biased. If you look at the answers first, you think, well, I think that one looks correct. And then when you're trying to actually figure out whether it is correct or not, you'll have that statement in mind, you'll have that answer in mind. It's better to almost think about the answer based on the theory, based on the knowledge, and then look at the answer choices and say which of these choices best correlates with my answer. And always make sure that you read all of the choices. Don't just stop at the one that sounds correct. Because again, you might find yourself in a position like this, where you read through, you get 2 or 3 options in, and you think, this one definitely, that really sticks out to me as something that describes the difference, and then stop. Because it might be, again, because they're all technically correct, just one is better than the other. It could be that option D is the best one. So always keep reading. And another way of doing this is to work backwards in terms of, well, once you've got your answer, is you can, what your idea of the answer is, you can eliminate the ones that it definitely isn't like, and work backwards. And also look out for conflicting or agreeing answers. For example, opposite answers cannot both be correct. So if you have got 2 options, option B is the best because it will lead to this. Option A is the best because it will lead to this. Option B is not going to lead to profit or something like that. Well, option B can't be the best one and the worst one at once if it's, say, which 2 of these statements is correct. So it must be that option A is good in certain situations and option B is not as good in certain situations. That was a not particularly clear example, but if you know what I mean. You can't, an answer, if it's selecting more than one, the correct answers can't be more the 2 sides of the same coin. So an example of this is we've got here. So it's about looking at a graph relating to the price elasticity of goods. So for example, the first one here you've got select 3 that apply. And the first 2 options are the demand curve is represented by a horizontal line. And the second one is the demand curve is represented by a vertical line. Now, those can't both be true. It will have to be one or the other. So we know that it's definitely only one of those. It can't be both. The same for the 3rd, 4th, and 5th options. An increase in price leads to a loss in demand. The level of demand is sensitive to a change in price, and any increase in price leads to a total loss of demand. Again, they cannot all be true, because they conflict with each other. So always make sure you're on the lookout for those sorts of options as well to really help pinpoint the specific answers. And as I mentioned before, just answer everything if you have a problem, if you are unable to figure out the answer, because there are no negative marking. And so just a quick bit of guidance for numerical questions as well. Make sure you look at how many decimal places are needed. And if there are no guidance, then make sure you round it to the nearest whole number. But as I mentioned, only round when you get to your final answer. And the question itself will also say whether to use the certain symbols, such as pound signs, dollar signs, etc., percentages, minus signs, etc. But do include a minus if the answer is negative. So just a quick bit about who we are at Astranti. Just as a thank you to CIMA Ireland for allowing us to do this presentation. As I mentioned, we've been around for quite a while. We've got courses for everything, but we do actually offer 3 courses for BA1, BA2, BA3, and BA4. And we have study texts, revision notes, videos, and questions and mock exams, all completely free for those particular courses. So if you would like to use those free materials, then please sign up at www.astranti.com. Just an overview of what we have there. We've got full study texts. So for each particular of those exams, we've got revision notes, which is a quicker, more condensed version of the study text using a lot more diagrams and imagery. We've got tuition videos. So for each of those particular modules, we've got 15, 20 to 25 hours worth of videos going through presentations explaining these topics for all of you to watch. Exam practice kits, 30 questions on each chapter of the study text, and also there are 3 60-question or 85 for BA4 mock exams for each paper. And also we have an online community. We have forums on the website where people, students and tutors, etc., can ask questions and share information. So you can get all of that for free on the Astranti website. And just before we go into the question section, just got just a few extra bits from a presentation, a motivation webinar that I did for the CIMA UK, just to give you a bit more extra information. So this was a thing about excuses that students make for not cracking on with their studies, and we had 6 or 7 things that we went through in a kind of an objection loop to say what problems the student had. So I'll just give you a couple of those because we haven't got the time to go through it all, but just to give you a bit of extra motivation. One thing students often say is it's too expensive, but really is it? Online training can cost us those £200 per module. In fact, as I've just said, we've got 3 materials there. Online training makes it a lot easier, not traveling between classrooms anymore. And actually, ask your employer if you haven't already. We've got thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of students on our database, and we surveyed them, and 60% of them said that they were in some way funded by their employers. So do ask your employer if you haven't already. And if you look at how much money you could make, it makes sense as well. Are you really worrying about spending £500 on tuition for certificate level when your salary might increase by £6,000 or so it'll be around about 6,000 to 7,000 euros in just from passing your certificate. Then go up by another few thousand when you pass operational. So yes, you're investing. It's not paying. It's not an expense. It's an investment. You're investing in your own salary in the future. If you earn 3,000, 4,000 euros more a year, every year for the next 10 years, then it's been it's been very worthwhile spending 500 euros on a course or something like that. And students also say, well, how is CIMA really going to help with your career? And there's a few other facts and information about CIMA here, that if you ever want to work abroad, well, CIMA accountants operate in 179 countries. 179 countries employ have companies that employ CIMA accountants. So if you ever want to move abroad, do you want to work for a large company? Well, based on the FTSE 100, so the largest 100 companies on the UK stock market, 96% of those employ at least some form of management accountant. And actually, when you look at the board of directors, 40% of companies or CFOs on the FTSE 100 are qualified accountants, and 20% of CEOs are qualified accountants. So there is opportunity, and because it's all online as well, you can fit all your studying around yourself. Again, not only have employers offered to pay for some of the exams, a lot of students that we surveyed actually were given study leave as well. So maybe ask your employer about that. And one thing that I do want to just mention again, before we run out of time, this is a really, really important one, is about what I like to call future-proofing. So this is when we get to the end of this presentation, and we've gone through all these things, and you say, well, I like to have an operational level job. I like to use all the numbers. That's what I'm good at. And I get that. But the World Economic Forum has predicted that 60 to 80% of jobs that are considered numbery jobs are going to disappear in the next couple of decades. So that's why the CIMA syllabus, the non-certificate syllabus, changed recently to feature a lot more stuff about digital technology and digital ecosystems, etc. So CIMA is preparing students for this more digital future. And employers do value the additional, more strategic level stuff that you learn later in your CIMA qualification. So in a sense, you are future-proofing your profession as well, because if you are just doing a kind of numbers invoice processing type job, that job's going to be gone in 10, 20 years' time. But what computers won't be able to replace, at least not very effectively, is that more qualitative analysis, that strategic knowledge, that experience. So it's best to really get on with your CIMA studies as much as possible, as early as possible, because the sooner you really get on with it, the sooner you'll be passed, the sooner you'll be earning more money, the sooner you'll have more opportunity, the sooner you'll future-proof your future career. So, or you future-proof your career. So we just got a few minutes left, so I'd like to open the floor up to any questions based on either the certificate, paper, or CIMA, or Astranti, any questions that you may want to ask. Okay, so the difference between multiple choice and multiple response. So multiple choice is where there is one answer. You've got a list of options and one is the correct answer. Multiple response is where there are several different options and a certain amount of them will be correct. So it will say select 2 that apply, or select 3 that apply, or select all that apply. So multiple response will usually be 4 options, 1 is correct. Multiple response will usually be 5, 6, or 7 options, of which 2 or 3 are correct. And yes, also, if you can't answer it, click that flag in the top corner. And that means that when you get to the end, you click on that navigator button, it will tell you exactly which of the questions have been left unanswered. And you'll be able to click on them and it'll take you instantly right back to it. Okay, so the Mendelow's matrix was not in the BA1. So I would need to check our BA1 textbook to see if it is there. If it is not in there, what I would say is that the Mendelow's matrix is in our other study texts. So we actually, to be fair, we have the 3 certificate levels. We also have 3 study texts for all the other levels as well. So that will be in either our E1 or our P1 study text or our F1 study text. They also be in our BA. I'd have to double check it. As I said, I operate at the strategic level. I don't usually use the certificate materials, but we will potentially have it in our BA4 as well. And thank you for the notes and the videos. We do try to make them as useful as possible. We try to make them as engaging as possible using the Prezi formula software rather than standard PowerPoint and presentation software to make it more of a unique looking video and displayed in a way that really flows all together. Yes, you'll need to leave them blank, or even if you do attempt to answer them, the important thing is you have to click flag. It won't automatically flag it just because you didn't put an answer in. You have to click that flag button. The CIMA textbook has errors. What's CIMA doing about this? You would need to contact CIMA. We do not have any Astranti, we don't have any control over the CIMA books. The CIMA books themselves are actually produced by Kaplan. So I personally wouldn't know the answer to that question. I would contact CIMA Ireland as well. It probably not the people to ask. Would be the UK CIMA that has the contracts with Kaplan, etc. Would be the people to ask. But I can't speak obviously about what any of that because I don't know what the situation is. Okay, it says, so Events Ireland would like to answer this question live, and they've said CIMA contact. So contact your CIMA contact for more information about that. But that's not something I can personally deal with as the Astranti strategic tutor at this point. So I'll just quickly read through the questions. Okay. Are there any other questions? Just got a couple more minutes if you do have any questions. Also, while we're here, just like to tell you about the other webinars we have coming up. So we're going to be, this is one of 5 that we are doing for CIMA Ireland. This was the introduction, just going over what the certificate exam is. We do have 4 more specific ones coming up, where we're going to be looking at the BA1, the BA2, BA3, and BA4 respectively. I'll actually be hosting the BA2 one, and some of my colleagues will be hosting the others. And in those, what we're going to do is we're going to pick out several topics that students really struggle with, some of the harder topics within those modules. And we're going to go through a very mini presentation over each of them. And that will then finish with the working through of a question. So we'll have a question on screen, and we'll dissect it and go through it live on the screen, coming up with the answer. But if there are no more questions, I'd like to thank you very much for having me, so to speak. I hope you have enjoyed this presentation. I hope you have a good idea of just a few things to look at with regards to your approach to it, and how you're going to approach the exams as well, thinking about your exam technique and how you can look at those questions and find out what they're actually asking, etc. And also do sign up for the Astranti material, www.astranti.com. As I said, it's all free. There's no need to put any kind of credit card details in or anything like that either. It's all free, and we've got study text, revision notes, videos, and questions and mock exams for BA 1, 2, 3, and 4. So do take a look at that. And thank you for having me. And yeah, I've enjoyed it, and I hope to see you again for the BA 2 and the BA 1, 3, and 4 webinars as well.